What is a Rayim? Is it a unicorn? In this video, we will investigate a creature called a Rayim. I found this creature difficult to identify, but I will not skip over it. When considering the creatures of Job, there are three that are not easy to identify with known animals on Earth. First is this Rayim. The second is the Behemoth or Behemoth. Third is the Leviathan or Leviathan. A few lexicons are honest about the difficulties in finding animal species that match these names and their contextual descriptions. Some translations don't even bother translating these Hebrew words into English, instead leaving them as Hebrew transliterations. Before starting this research project, it had never crossed my mind that these difficult-to-identify creatures might simply be ancient descriptions of apparent nebulae shapes. The only way to find out is to read the context of each narrative, get some of the lexicon definitions, and then look for matching apparent shapes in the nebulae. So here is the narrative of the next creature in Job 39. Will the wild ox or Rayim be willing to serve you? Will he bed by your manger? Can you bind the wild ox in the furrow with ropes, or will he plow the valleys behind you? Will you trust him because his strength is great, or will you leave your labor to him? Will you trust him to bring home your grain and gather it to your threshing floor? These verses again appear to be in poetic pairs, in a series of questions rather than statements. Each question could be answered with a yes or no, and we would need to know more about the character of this creature to answer. It seems to be comparing this creature to a domesticated ox used for farming. The lexicons seem to have multiple guesses as to what this Rayim creature is. The Brown Driver Briggs lexicon offers the following possibilities. First, a wild ox, then a white antelope, Antelope leucoryx, unicorn, and a rhinoceros. The lexicons place this creature among a family of Resh Alef Mem words that convey the sense of rise, lifted up, heights, and coral. So it could be that this creature is lifted up higher on its legs, or perhaps has horns that are lifted up high above its head. Let us start with the translation of unicorn. In the last video, I talked about a youth game called Telephone, where a message that is whispered around a circle becomes distorted. As we have seen in previous videos, the Greek descriptions contain a bit more fantasy and are distorted. It seems this distortion may have happened while translating the name of this creature into other languages. We English folk borrowed from the Latin Vulgate, and the Latin Vulgate borrowed from the Greek Septuagint. The Greeks translated the Rayim creature as monokeros, meaning one horn. The Romans then translated the Greek word into Latin as unicornus, also meaning one horn. The result is another chuckle moment, where we English folk in 1611 initially chose the Latin word unicorn to describe this Rayim creature. Based on the Greek Septuagint and the Latin Vulgate, some scholars attempted to identify this Rayim as a rhinoceros. However, this Rayim cannot be a rhinoceros, because the rhinoceros does not appear to inhabit the Fertile Crescent. As accurate details are required to recognize a nebula shape for this creature, I found it worth investigating whether the Hebrew narratives describe Rayim as having one horn or multiple horns. Passages that describe a Rayim speak of the creature as having horns in the dual form, simply meaning two horns. There is only one passage where the horn is found as singular. But my horn you have exalted like a wild ox. I have been anointed with fresh oil. However, it seems this singular horn is belonging to a person that is to be anointed. A horn was usually filled with oil and used to anoint the heads of kings and priests. Now, there is much more to say about this anointing process, but we will leave that to a future video. A different word, translated as horns, is found in Numbers. Both times it is not dual but plural. So, from the perspective of the Hebrew narratives and that of Job, we are looking for a nebula shape with two horns. Modern English translations now use the phrase wild ox instead of the incorrect translation of unicorn. And I'm sorry to disappoint those who love unicorns. It is most likely that the unicorn is a creature from the realms of fantasy and is a poor translation of Rayim by the Greeks, Romans, and even English translators. The next animal to investigate from the Brown Driver-Briggs lexicon is a white antelope or a leucoryx, also known as an Arabian oryx. even though this creature inhabits the region of the Fertile Crescent, and it has high lifted up horns relating to the meaning of Rayim, it does not fit logically into the narrative in terms of being able to plow, having great strength, or threshing and bringing in grain. Next, the Strong's Lexicon suggests that this creature is probably the great aurochs, or wild bulls, which are now extinct. The aurochs simply means wild ox. So far, this creature best matches the description of the Hebrew narratives. First, it is considered the wild ancestor of modern domestic cattle, which matches Job's narrative of serving, plowing, threshing, and bringing in grain. Second, the description of the wild ox includes the Fertile Crescent. Third, this wild ox was one of the largest herbivores, with massive horns. The size of its body and horns may relate to its name, Rayim, as similar Resh Alef Mem words convey the sense of rise, lifted up, and heights. Thus, the Hebrew name may refer to its large body and massive horns. Fourth, it has 2 horns, which match the Hebrew narratives that reference its horns. Fifth, the Job narrative asks questions that seem to indicate the Rayim pertains to a wild ox, as opposed to a domestic ox, in which case the answer to the questions would be no, as this wild ox is difficult to tame. The Gesenius lexicon contains a much longer article on this creature. I'll post the lexicon definitions on the GitHub page if others would like to investigate this creature. Now that we have found a creature that matches the descriptions in the narrative, it seems the closest nebula shape to match is here. Let us now read the description in Job, but this time search for details in this nebula region. Will the wild ox be willing to serve you? First, we have already mentioned that the Hebrew name of this creature has the sense of rise, lifted up, and heights. This apparent wild ox shape is in the upper region of the galactic bulge and has 2 prominent dark horns that match those of the wild ox. Will he bed by your manger? Most of us know that a manger is a feed box for animals. Those who understand French will probably be able to guess what manger means. Our English word manger is borrowed from the French word manger, meaning to eat. It seems the French borrowed the word from a Latin word meaning to chew. An apparent feed box shape can be seen here. There is much to say about this box shape, which we will leave for other videos. Can you bind the wild ox in the furrow with ropes, or will he plow the valleys behind you? These two lines describe the traditional method that furrows or trenches were made in fields before planting. When we look closely behind this apparent ox shape, you will notice two dark lines that resemble furrows or trenches. When considering these furrows above and behind this apparent creature shape, an odd thought came to mind. At this point, it is doubtful to know for certain, but the furrow line up the middle between the horns may have been interpreted by the Greeks as a creature with a single horn. The single-horned beast, taken up by Latin-speaking Romans and passed off to us English folk in the King James Bible as a unicorn. Will you trust him because his strength is great, or will you leave your labor to him? Will you trust him to bring home your grain and to gather it to your threshing floor? These last three pairs appear to be comparing this wild ox to the labors that a domestic ox is known for, namely that of plowing fields and carrying the harvest grain to a threshing floor. Threshing floors were usually located atop a hill that was exposed to wind, which was used to separate the grain from the chaff. When we look at traditional threshing floors in operation, we see heaps of sheaves of grain. Let us look again at this nebulae region, this time as a location for a threshing floor near the crest of a hill. We can see there is an apparent shape that matches the heap of sheaves or grain just behind the wild ox. The ecliptic path of the sun, moon, and planets intersects the dense red band of stars in this region of the Rayim. At the opposite region, we find the sun, moon, and planets intersect an Alef ox. The ecliptic path of sun, moon, and planets crosses in front of the Milky Way twice. It is interesting that both crossing points have the apparent shape of oxen. This may explain why the Egyptians, Babylonians, and other nations interpreted these shapes as something to be worshipped. However, if one carefully reads Scripture, it is evident that it is a sin to worship both the stars and to worship cows, bulls, oxen, and calves. There were severe repercussions for worshipping the golden calf at Sinai. In the book of Kings and Chronicles, there is an often repeated reminder how Jeroboam caused Israel to sin with his 2 calf idols, one in Dan and the other in Bethel. You call this an astronomical chronology puzzle, and you ask us, was the Paleo Hebrew alphabet part of an ancient star map calendar system? But ever since you left the Noah narrative, we have mainly been looking at nebula shapes that resemble the creatures of Job. When will we get to look at the chronology and calendar systems? You are right. Let us again refocus on the Alef Tav calendar chart. The letters of the Paleo Hebrew alphabet mapped along the ecliptic path. Unlike the derived Greek and Latin alphabets, each Paleo Hebrew letter's name has a meaning which appears to cross-reference apparent nebulae shapes. I found the narrative of Job and the Rayim help me better understand the sound and purpose of 2 letters. Once the letters were aligned along the ecliptic, this Rayim is in the region of Lamed and Mem. Lamed means ox goad. And Mem means water. Back in video 13, we looked at the Noah narrative, where water, or Mayim, or even Mem, is a key theme. A great conjunction started the narrative in the region of Mem. We looked at the shape of the letter and put water in our mouth and held it with our lips, making a sound. Now, with finding a nebulae shape that matches the description of Rayim, or wild ox, we have a second confirmation of both the shape and sound of Mem. There were 2 nebula shapes that resembled Mem. First, the horns, and second, the mouth of the Rayim. Now, even though Rayim is extinct, can you guess the sound a Rayim or wild ox would have made? My first guess of the Mem being within the horns does not make as much sense as my second guess of the nebula by the mouth of the Rayim. The letter that precedes Mem is Lamed, which means ox goad. You can see a long, tall, dark nebula resembling the shape of an ox goad, and it is apparently above or behind this Rayim wild ox. Not only that, but when we line up the letters of the Hebrew alphabet in a row, we find the Lamed is written above all the other letters, even above the red line on the page. Locating the Lamed nebula brought a great delight to my inner nerd, when the Lamed's protruding property suddenly made logical sense. The dark nebula representing the Lamed is found above all the other nebula letters, just like the Lamed is written above the line. If you were to make the Lamed sound in your mouth, just imagine your tongue as the goad, which reaches up high in your mouth to make an l sound. Later in history, the Greek and Latin alphabets were derived from this Paleo Hebrew. They decided to drop this letter from being above the other letters. So far, each animal listed in the book of Job has an uncanny number of details that match apparent nebulae shapes in the Milky Way. Why could this be? In the next video, we will investigate if these matching nebulae patterns continue hidden within the narrative of the ostrich.